Hi, my name's Timothy. I'm a design director at Microsoft. I run a team called the Design Lab. I would say, blacked out a little bit on stage. Figma reached out, talk about AI or talk about keyboards. I felt like there'll be a bunch of other AI talks. I thought this actually could be a surface for expressions. We prototype a lot, working directly with the model. Chat is a very linear process. Design becomes a little bit more like pottery now, shaping it, feeling how it resists. It's less about kind of like should they code, developing like the literacy. There is still a sense of anxiety and fear, and if we're not careful, they kind of average everything out. Meta was a lot more performance driven, made me be a little bit more intentional. Without direction and guidance, they fill in the blanks. We should care about what are in those blank spaces. Taste, right? Taste not just in how something looks, but also how it behaves and how it responds. Like if you don't define that, someone else will.
That's one of the limitations at the moment with Figma Make potentially, or of course, these tools is what's the intensity like at Microsoft?
I mean, it's tricky to say.
Your most used AI tool right now?
Ooh.
So I thought I'd start with maybe talking about actually your time fairly recently, which was at Config here in London.
Yeah.
I saw you there on stage, and I thought your talk was fantastic. I'd love to know how that came about, and maybe share what you spoke about there at Config.
It was really kind of unexpected to be doing that. Even while I was doing it, I would say blacked out a little bit on stage. But yeah, Figma reached out and asked if I wanted to give a talk, and they kind of gave me freedom to decide what I wanted to talk about. And the kind of two things that were in my mind were talk about AI or talk about keyboards. And I felt like there'll be a bunch of other AI talks, but I doubt that anyone would talk about keyboards. So I thought that could be a great talk to have. And, that journey into the hobby, I thought was one that was led to kind of a dream that I had around building physical products, and maybe somewhat inspiring for people. Yeah.
One thing that was a paramount to me when all those talks, everything was super crisp, like the craft quality of even the presentation. One, obviously the way people presented, but also the actual presentations and tech. So I think that's quite interesting. What was the kind of relationship with Figma when they were like kind of checking your deck? Like, was there reviews, or were they really like, was Dylan there, like, like checking it and stuff? Like, how did it go down?
Yeah, no, Dylan wasn't there, but there were reviews, and actually that's one thing that I commend the team for. There were, a few rounds of review. I mean, they gave you a lot of creative freedom. The only kind of rule was like you have to use Figma slides, but I didn't mind it. That was all right. But yeah, I mean, they were very helpful in helping, improve the narrative, right? Like I came up with a rough story and had a few slides, and they had really great feedback on like, here's where you could go deeper on this topic, or here's where you could push that further. And closer to the actual event, we had some in-person run through as well, and then one on the stage, like a dry run. So there was a lot of preparation, and it became quite a really professionally handled situation. So yeah, I've never given a presentation with so much preparation before.
You obviously spoke about your passion for keyboards,
yeah,
and everything around that. Let's jump into, we'll talk about Microsoft, we'll talk about Wunderlist acquisition, talk about maybe even your time at Meta. So you've had a wealth of experience, but yeah, it'd be great just to hear about your keyboard passion and what it's called and what it does, and how did you get into it, and what's happening with it.
It's a kind of an unexpected hobby that I ended up falling into. So during the pandemic, I think like a lot of people, I was trying to figure out what home office space I wanted, and stumbled on a video about keyboards, and I'd never really kind of considered them before. I think like a lot of us, we've probably seen them on desks of engineers or something, and they're always quite noisy. Having all that time on my hands during the pandemic, I felt like could be a thing I could pick up and mess around with after watching a video on YouTube. Just actually getting into the diversity, the complexity, the nuance of the hobby. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. You could like customize the typing feel, how heavy the switches are, the sound, the actual keycaps, the build. I never really saw keyboards that look like this. The ones that I would see usually are kind of like plastic and very kind of simple, and but these are like sometimes fully aluminum and really, really beautiful lines. And I thought this actually could be a surface for expression. So that was kind of really what drew me in.
Yeah. Well, you've got some here.
Yeah.
We'll obviously bring this up on an overlay in edit. I'm just going to pick this one up.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously being in tech, obviously I've seen these around, and I've sat next to people who've got them. I've never had one.
Yeah.
I've never had, but they are. I mean, they're obviously very heavy, but they are beautiful, and I can see why they would be so nice, and the tactile nature of them.
Yeah.
Why do they need to be so heavy, or maybe not need to be? Why are they so heavy?
I think it's, you could argue there's a bit of material science there, like different materials, create different sound. So depending on the material, the resonance within the case produces a different sound signature. But like they don't necessarily have to be metal. They can also be plastic. And there are some really great, fully plastic keyboards. But I think people just love, sometimes things that feel a bit heavier, using sort of aluminum or brass or other materials like that, have a sense of weight and quality to them, the craft that you can get from these materials and what you can do with them in terms of machining. I think it kind of pushes the boundaries of just the traditional injection molded process of like plastic. Yeah.
That's so nice. I'm just gonna do.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will come out or do it justice. Yeah, yeah, really nice. I love that they feel solid as well.
I have probably too many now, but these are some of the few that I enjoy the most. And the keycaps are some of the ones that I've designed myself.
On that, the key caps,
Yeah.
right? So that's the distinction. So obviously, you're not making the keyboard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you're obviously making the caps. Are you also, in terms of the like, are you calibrating the kind of what is it, the down press and make the noise, or not so much on that piece? Is it more the design of the caps?
It's a very modular system, so sort of each piece can be swapped out for something else. So the switches themselves, that's what kind of decides the downforce pressure required to actuate the actual key, even the sound signature. And so in these examples here, these are just the keycaps themselves, the actual plastic pieces that go on top. They're pretty standardized sizes and shapes of them. Most of these ones here are what we call cherry, which is kind of the more standard profile. But yeah, in these cases, I'm just designing the keycaps, and that's I think the beauty of it, right? You can take a board and decide what plate you want. Do you want a soft plate that maybe has kind of a more bouncy feedback when you're typing? Do you want a much harder plate like aluminum or something, which has a bit more of a reactive response when you're typing? Do you want to switch that silent so it's really, really stealthy? Do you want one that's really clicky and loud? Do you want one that has a bit of tactility to it, so when you press it down you actually have a bit of feedback? Or do you want one that feels really smooth? There's so much customization that's there, and that's one of the things that really, really drew me in.
Yeah, amazing. You said you mentioned that you spoke to some other maybe people involved in keyboard creation, like some maybe well-known people. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, through the hobby, I've got to meet and chat with a lot of people, and actually, funnily enough, I was one of the I guess he's one of the presenters on the Waveform podcast. Andrew, he also kind of dove headfirst into the hobby and talk sometimes on Instagram. But he brought up the ski cap set on one of the podcasts. It was kind of surprising. I was getting messages from friends saying, "Hey, look, this your design is on here." It's been great, kind of meeting new people, getting to share in this, I guess, a bit of a weird love for these metal rectangles. But yeah, it's been a fun ride so far.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to reconsider my Apple keyboard that I've had probably for over 10 years. It's the same keyboard, and yeah, maybe it's time to reconsider. So what you're doing at Microsoft, you've spoke about, it's AI Design Labs, is that right? So what exactly for Office?
Yeah.
What exactly do you do there, and how AI first is it, and so on?
Yeah, so I run a pretty small kind of incubation team, and I think our focus really was to try to explore the technology in a prototyping first way. Microsoft is a huge company, and I think when these technologies started to emerge and become more of an opportunity for the business, I think there was a space to innovate, right? And I think that innovation process requires a little bit of depth and exploration, and so the team was really set up as a way to do that. And so we prototype a lot, and we're working directly with the model and thinking around experiences that way, and we rely heavily on the scientific method to to, develop hypotheses, experiment and test those, and then from that learn and then make decisions and how to continue. And it's kind of like a loop that we follow. And we found that to be quite powerful because we don't have to connect directly to roadmaps. We can go off and explore on our own and then feed back that information, what we learn, the opportunities that we see into the different product teams.
Okay, so as an incubation team, you effectively you're kind of like these mavericks working over here maybe, and you kind of get to work on things and you can move fast. And as you say, it could just be almost anything because it's kind of research, it's R&D type stuff. And then you can kind of go, oh, okay, we found something, and then you plug it in. So you're not hamstrung by like the likes of roadmap.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we try to be very intentional about what we choose to work on. We want to make sure that we are exploring in the area that aligns with the business goals as well. And so we think about some of the core jobs that our customers have, and we mostly play in that space so that what we do design and what we do create has potential to be implemented within the different products.
Is there anything that you would like to share about what you've been doing there that you could share? And if you can't, no worries. But is there anything that you'd think might be useful for anyone listening?
I can talk broadly about some of the, I guess, the larger things that the team is thinking about. So obviously Microsoft is a company that has built a lot of these productivity tools for writing, for creating presentations, for sort of, creating Excel sheets and sort of those tables and things like that. And if you think about the job of a knowledge worker, I think largely that's been something where the creation of these artifacts are pretty important to that process. Make a pitch, so you make a deck, and that deck is almost like the unit of value that information or knowledge worker has created. But now with AI, that generation process has become so much more of a commodity. You can make things so much faster. You can write 20, 30-page documents in a few minutes. And so what is that value now of that knowledge worker? I think we believe that, the thinking or the thought process, the decision making, the sense making, that now becomes the area where knowledge workers add the most value into the process. As these tools become more agentic and kind of go off and execute, how do we build systems that allow teams to, communicate knowledge more clearly, make decisions, make sense of all these sort of disparate ideas and put them together in a coherent way. So I think developing these types of tools that you could describe them as like tools for thought is really something that we are focused on and pushing on. That's probably how specific I can be.
Obviously, we've had this initial phase of AI where effectively it's a chat interface or a bot. And now I think, well, it's already happening, isn't it? Where things are, okay, we know that is great, but it's probably not an integrated experience. It's probably not the best way, and even it's not the best way to kind of get what you need done. Yeah. And so what's your take on, for example, when I say Copilot, I don't mean literally Copilot as in a Microsoft product, but I mean something that is supporting some sort of overlay chat versus having it more integrated. Do you feel like when you're thinking about designs, you're moving more away from that aspect, or do you think the future going forward is going to be a bit more integrated, and the chat won't be there, or the chat will be maybe almost less of a kind of surface and so on going forward?
I think sort of natural language obviously was like the first major way of interacting with these models, and I think it's a really powerful way. But the challenge there is that they're quite imprecise, and there's sort of a lot of steps within the process that maybe create more ambiguity in the user's intent. So, let's take writing, for example, and using AI to write using a chat experience. So the process of writing is very non-linear. Like you don't just sort of like spit out the final thing straight away. You maybe write a few thoughts down, then you maybe put that into some sort of structure or outline. Then you might write a section or two, and then you might revise that and maybe adjust the outline again. And it's kind of this back and forth process where or maybe more of a loop where you're kind of going into sort of a more deep focused creation to then more broad thinking and strategy. And chat is a very linear process. It's like input, output, and that doesn't necessarily always support that type of interaction. But additionally, like the process of writing is also a cognitive one, right? You're thinking about what you're trying to write. And some of the research that we were doing and that we saw was like the process of thinking about what you want to write and then thinking about how to express that to an AI, that metacognitive process is actually quite taxing. And so then that's on top of actually doing the writing yourself. And so chat is a really powerful but imprecise tool, and it doesn't always support every type of workflow. And so for the more nonlinear workflows, there needs to be more, in my opinion, like more direct interaction with the model. There were a bunch of explorations that were done looking into that, of how can you communicate intent in a nonlinear way. So as something progresses, like say writing, the model is aware of that change and can respond to that change in a nonlinear way. So you don't have to kind of like have this one directional back and forth.
So what was that like again? Feel free to like what.
So let's say, like, if you want to try and communicate how a document, there are a bunch of pieces in that document that are important to think about, like the tone, the structure. That type of information emerges over time. And so how do you sort of develop tools that can surface at the right moment to ask for that information and not kind of lose your train of thought at the same time? And there are tools that are kind of emerging that maybe are more UI driven versus chat first, that can allow for the communication between user and the model.
One of the really interesting things that drew my attention to your profile was you obviously worked at Wunderlist before it was acquired by Microsoft, and I find that fascinating. It's an app I used to use. I won't say what I use now, but I've always used to-do based apps. Like I live and die by them, sort of thing. And they're amazing. And I used to use Wunderlist, and I absolutely loved it. And it was such a beautiful and elegant and simple product. And I'd just love to understand, like, one, you're working on that, and how did it go down with the acquisition, and how did that change that working relationship? Like, obviously Microsoft come along. Did it speed things up, slow it down? Was there a bit of a lull? How did that affect you as a designer in that whole journey?
I always felt like going to university was a thing that you were supposed to do. And so I never really considered something else. But growing up, I'd always been interested in technology and design. And so even before university, I was like freelancing and working with clients. And when I went to university, I actually went to study software engineering. And after like my first lecture, I was like, this is too much math. So I ended up because I actually wanted to get into games and creating games. And I was like, this is just not for me. And so I quickly changed to the only other course that was available that was at least design focused, which was like a web design and technology course. And on that course, like, I just felt like wasn't really learning anything new and wasn't really being pushed. And so after my first year, I actually got a job offer, and I was like, the whole point of going to university was to try to get a job, and I potentially have one now. And so maybe I just like defer it and come back later. So I just dropped out to kind of with the idea of maybe later on I would go back to school. That first job was terrible. It was really bad, and I almost quit design because of it. Mixture of things. I think I underestimated, the pace of agency work, but I think also, yeah, it may not have been the best environment as well. But 6 months into that job, and to be fair, I learned a lot on that job. There was a great designer called David Savage who kind of like helped me and taught me about, back then skeuomorphism was like the thing, right? So it taught me about how to sort of apply light and shadow in Photoshop and how to kind of hone and use those tools to create realism. And I was really dabbling in that. And that's kind of when Wunderlist, or Six Wunderkinder, the company that owned Wunderlist, reached out and said, hey, do you want to come work in Berlin? And I was like, Berlin? Is this real? I was living in Manchester back then, yeah. And so I was like, I guess. So I flew out. Spent a couple of days there, and it was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, I kind of moved, and that was my first really entry into more product design. And it was really great experience because the team was very young, we were very energetic, we were very kind of like design driven, and the craft was always the most important thing, like the experience and how it felt. And yeah, I loved it. The team was small. We kind of grew over the years, but that really that how it felt was really the key, and that was really, you know, brought out in the leadership and how the team was led, and yeah, I remember that experience really fondly. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you saw that through that app, like it was so nice and almost bite sized. And again, I don't want to undersell it by saying it's bite sized because I know it could do many things, but that's what it had, that elegance to it. I was going to say, so what happened when Microsoft came in? Did you stay on? And that's how you obviously went on to be involved with Microsoft, or?
When the acquisition happened, I stayed at the company. So I think they loved what we built, and they kind of wanted to take it forward, and wanted the team to take it forward. And so I stayed on for about a year, and I probably would have stayed on longer. At the time, I'd gotten married around that time, and my partner wanted to study at the London College of Fashion. So we were like moving to the UK and working remotely. We were kind of still working on Wunderlist, but I think the plan was always to, you know, reimagine Wunderlist within the Microsoft ecosystem. I'd started working on a new app called To Do.
To do, yeah, I know. With the blue.
Yeah, with the blue
Thing,
check
yeah.
mark. And the idea there was like, you know, what could Microsoft's answer to like Apple's reminders be? Like what could be like the default, you know, productivity or to do app on Windows. That was cross functional. And so we kind of developed that, and we took it towards the alpha kind of release. And around that time, I left. Actually, during that period, Meta reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to come work here?" And I think I was intrigued by that offer because up until that point, you know, I would argue that that first experience at Wunderlist was where I kind of grew up as a designer. And so I grew into that role, and the team around me kind of saw that growth. And the question I always had for myself is like, you know, outside this environment, am I actually good? Am I still like, could I cut it in the quote unquote real world in a way? It was a position in London, so I could be at the office, and so around 2017, so almost about 2 years after the acquisition, I ended up leaving and going to Meta.
Yeah. Wow. Out of interest, do you use a to-do based like app, and do you mind me asking what it is?
Things. Yeah, things.
Things.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, looking back to when we were building Wunderlist, the other apps we looked at, Things was definitely one of them. And yeah, I still love it to today. I think they could probably add a few more features now. Todoist was another kind of great product that we were definitely looking at. But funnily enough, one of the things that we always said at Wunderlist was like our biggest competitor is pen and paper, because of how the tactility of that, the immediacy of that, the nostalgia of like, and just like grabbing a pen and just writing it down. We kind of always wanted that to be experience people had with our tool. And so we try to focus more on that lived experience, than other competitors. Yeah.
There was a little bit of a segue, I guess, there when you mentioned Meta. Obviously, Meta, you were there for just over a year, right? A bit longer than.
Yeah, almost 2 years. Yeah.
And obviously, maybe it's not a fair comparison because obviously the time that you've been at Microsoft is significantly more than Meta. But if you were to kind of describe your experiences, obviously you're probably in terms of how they differ. What is there anything in particular that you'd say was like the different? Anyone who's like, oh, you know, I'm considering going to Microsoft or Meta. If you, what a fantastic kind of option. What would the difference be, would you say?
There's many, yeah. I mean, I think the one, maybe the one that stands out the most when I do get asked this question is, I would say that Meta was a lot more performance driven. I quite like that, funnily enough. I think up until that point, I had kind of had a very, let's kind of go with the flow and see what happens type approach to my career. But Meta kind of like, you know, changed that and made me be a little bit more intentional. I would say even a lot more intentional about what I was doing, why I was doing it, and the impact that it had. At the same time, you know, that can also go too far a little bit where, you know, you're kind of only working on stuff to see how well it looks on your performance review. But I really loved that structure and the ability to kind of see, okay, this is what I plan to do. This is how what I'm doing is going to have impact both on the customers I'm designing for, but also on myself, on my career growth. And I think that was one thing leaving Meta that I, brought back to Microsoft when I ended up going back there. So that's probably the biggest difference. I think there are some smaller ones. Obviously, Meta or Facebook is a lot younger company than Microsoft, and so there was definitely some differences around the role of design and things like that. But largely, as an IC, that was the thing that stuck out to me the most.
So you said you kind of touched on it there, the role of design, because Meta is a younger company. So
Yeah.
what is the role of design between the two, would you say? And it differs what team you're in, right? Of course. But so it's not apples to apples.
Even within Microsoft, depending on the team, design plays many different roles. And funnily enough, the team that I was on, which was focused on sort of the ad space that Meta had built around, because of their business model was around sort of advertising, the infrastructure around experimentation and metrics and testing was so rigorous that they were very sort of data driven. And I think because of that data driven approach, design had a little bit more latitude to influence the direction of the products, I would say. If we think about sort of the bigger spaces, the Blue app and Instagram and WhatsApp, I think, that cross-functional collaboration was super, super strong. And over the years at Microsoft, I've seen that really evolve as well, where PM engineering and design are shaping the direction together. I think in a lot of cases, Microsoft is an engineering-driven company, which has historically been the case, and it's led to, I would say, largely its success and its longevity. But more and more, we're seeing design over the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, like take on more of that directional responsibility of where the product should be going, and even sort of coming back to Microsoft, that was my job, really thinking about like what is the new mobile strategy for Microsoft and how do we bring that through the design experience.
What's the intensity like at Microsoft? Because the intensity is, Meta is renowned for the intensity.
Yeah.
So how would you see it differ? And again, it was obviously a few years ago, so things changed. But how would you see that intensity?
I mean, it's tricky to say. I was remote, and so I was working in the UK. The team at the time, there was just 4 of us on the team, and we were kind of all distributed. And so I think within our team, we had I would say like a sort of a healthy intensity. Like we wanted to move quickly, we wanted to experiment, we wanted to try things. But I think as a whole, a company at that scale, moving really quickly is challenging. Though, like there's a lot at risk and a lot at stake. Like some of these products are used by billions of people, and in often cases their businesses depend on the functions and the ability for these products to kind of maintain performance. And so moving quickly was challenging. I would say that like today it's different. I think the sort of new AI landscape has opened up opportunity for us to move much more quickly and experiment more and try more things. And so yeah, it has evolved over time, but I understand the context of building tools that in often cases governments to run on. There's a lot of responsibility there to be intentional and careful.
I thought it would be a good idea maybe do a quick fire round. So I'm going to ask some questions. They're going to be pretty quick. 1 word or 2 word, or if you need to use more words, obviously use more words. But I thought it'd be quite interesting. There's 10 of them.
Right.
And there's no particular order. But yeah, all right, here we go. Figma or physical notebook?
Figma.
Tactile, linear, or clicky switches?
Linear.
Okay. 1 word to describe the office of the future?
Personal.
Okay. Your most used AI tool right now?
Ooh. Claude Code.
Berlin or London?
London.
Okay. Dark mode or light mode?
Light mode.
Best font for productivity app?
Ooh.
That is so niche and so designery.
Yeah. Favorite?
The biggest distraction for designers today?
Ooh. I would say like all this AI stuff, funnily enough.
Really? Yeah. And 1 item on your desk you can't live without?
Keyboards.
I thought you might.
Yeah.
I thought you might
Easy
say
one.
that. Yeah. And your ultimate blueprint instruction for a designer in 1 word?
Curiosity.
Well, that was a quick fire. Great responses. Yeah, no, love that. Bit weird, isn't it? It's just like shoehorned into the middle of this. I think
it's good. It kind of because like it's already kind of like we're flowing, so it's probably good
Yeah,
to get those out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I think we obviously kind of jumping a little bit back to the AI, the lab stuff, the AI stuff. One of the things, obviously, being an incubation lab is great because you can come up with these ideas and then you can put them into like maybe the roadmap, or you can put it into work and say do that, as opposed to being tied to the roadmap. What happens? How do you avoid that, like the corporate side kind of getting mixed up in terms of that complexity? For example, you might go, we found X, Y, and Z. We feel like we should move with this. But then the corporate's like, yeah, but we've got all these, it's already in motion. We've got these roadmaps. We've assigned a head count. And these are priority. Like, how do you kind of debunk what's already in motion in a lab situation?
I don't think I have a perfect answer, because I think it's a challenging one to figure out, and I think also depends on the situation. I think one thing that the team has tried to do is a bit of a hybrid approach to working on these experiences. And so we often try to kind of see if there's an experience that a team is working on, and then maybe collaborate with them a little bit on it. And so this kind of gives us an entry point into the team. And so PMs, design, engineering, we're all sort of collaborating around the idea, using the process that my team sort of are developing around this more scientific, method approach. That has been somewhat successful in getting some of the thinking over the line. But I think additionally, when we build these experiences, we try to do it in a way where it can be kind of product agnostic. So we focus more on the core interaction or the core intent. And as part of the work, we actually end up doing quite a lengthy write-up around the process that we took, what we learned along the way, what the opportunities are. And so even if something doesn't get picked up right away, there is a durable surface that people can go to and see, hey, okay, this is an idea that was done a year ago, 6 months ago, that could be useful now. And so there's always a space to revisit it. So there's, even if things might not ship, that's also okay. And even if things don't ship, some of the learning that we might have around the processes that we took to arrive at a solution could still be beneficial to teams to help improve the way that they're working.
How do you find going in? So you go, oh, okay, we've done this. We think this team, it would sit nicely with this team. How do you kind of implement that without them, for example, I'm sure people have been there where there's almost like overlap with work, and obviously it's a collaborative approach, but how do you make it so that, oh, they're like, no, we're doing this anyway, and making sure everyone feels like they're getting good enough ownership and all that good stuff?
It's a challenging one. I think like these experiences, they need to be felt, right? You have to use them to sometimes see the value. And so we try very hard to not fake things when we build these experiences. So everything that we demonstrate is using the models that we have available, is real today. The level of nuance or the accuracy might be, not at production level, but like there's clear opportunity there. Even sometimes we might do research on the results as well, and demonstrate that we just can't force our experiences to be implemented. And I think that's also okay. As I was heading into the new year, one of the things I was thinking about is like how, the team has been around for a little bit now, and what is our operating model, and how should we start sort of thinking about our work. And the kind of partnerships to me are more about influencing the way of working, actually, more than the things that we might create. Like the things that we create have value, but I think what's actually more valuable is like bringing the whole design studio. I mean, not to say that we know it all, but sort of bringing the whole design studio forward in processes and the way that we're working. I think that's way, way more valuable than anything that my team might come up with in a sort of incubation process.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we have a similar thing at the moment. Of course, can't go into details, but it is that, isn't it? It's like how when people, it's almost maybe some waterfall type ways of working, or like legacy type approaches, which just naturally happens, doesn't it, in a kind of typical format. But if you are in an incubation or a small team, you have that license and you can help kind of disrupt a little bit teams, can't you, and shake them up to get things moving. And that can be, that definitely can be more impactful. You're obviously a director. You have IC levels and stuff, don't you? What do you see your role as a director? Maybe it's like how hands-on are you as a director, and how much because you probably, one of the things I imagine it's quite difficult, particularly because you've been so hands-on, and you've not gone the manager route, right? You want to probably be involved in the actual doing of the work, but obviously as a director, you probably are doing that a bit less,
Yeah.
which is understandable, and you're, orchestrating and helping people move forward. Yeah. So how do you find that, and how hands-on are you with the actual work?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the kind of player coach is like the example the sort of the metaphor that I would give. Like, I am somewhat hands on, but it's in a very sort of technical way. Um, I am a manager actually. I do have people report to me, and it was never really a path that I had really considered seriously, but I'm actually so glad that I ended up doing it. I really enjoy this side of the work. Obviously there's parts of managing that like maybe the paperwork isn't the most fun, but I love kind of influencing the direction of both the product experience but also the careers of the people that I manage.
So you are doing like the performance write-ups and
Yeah,
stuff. Oh, okay. Apologies. Yeah,
that's all right.
because I
Yeah,
thought it'd be a director, but maybe a more very IC focused director.
I mean, for a long time, that was what I was doing. Like, I was largely an IC, kind of part of the sort of the team helping guide stuff. But yeah, and about 2 years ago, I kind of became a manager, and yeah, that role's been interesting. But it's kind of a player coach type thing where I'm still hands on. I'm still sometimes writing code or in Figma and designing. A bit less now, but I'm actually quite happy with that. Like, I think what interests me more now is some of the more organizational design, the business strategy, and like deploying my skills to affect change in the product through those means versus being hands-on. So how can I develop a team that's structured in a way that can result in the experience that we're looking for? I think the way that teams are set up, the way that they collaborate, the culture play a massive role in what gets shipped. And so that's a really interesting challenge to try and solve. And that's what's been kind of in my mind recently. Yeah.
You mentioned obviously being a director, you are a manager as well, consequently. But you also do mentoring, right? Out obviously in as part of Microsoft, but outside and externally. I mean,
Yeah.
it might be interesting. Anyone who's listening might want to be mentored by Timothy.
It's been a couple of years I started doing that, and sort of more officially with a company called Good Maven, who actually hired me to join Facebook back then.
No way! Wow. Okay.
And we kind of stayed in touch. I just kind of loved her vision of really trying, she has a very thoughtful, individual, focused approach, of like what's best for this one person. And so sort of being able to participate in with her in this business has been really fun. But I also enjoy like the process of coaching or of mentoring. There are a lot of things that I still don't know that I'm still learning, but I think there's a lot of value in hearing from the experiences of others and seeing how they approached problems and how they found solutions. And I often feel like designers that I speak to, they often have like the skills that they think they don't, and they often have the right characteristics, but it's often a challenge of like how to tell the right story and what's the strategy of actually demonstrating these types of behaviors at your job, how to advocate for yourself better, how to have more confidence in who you are. And like those are the things that I struggled with in my career, and had other people help me and guide me. And so it felt like a great opportunity to kind of pay that back. Yeah.
If anyone did want to, it sounds really weird, doesn't it, Arthur? But if anyone did want to touch base with you, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you just either on LinkedIn, just look at my profile, or just search Good Maven Coaching on Google, I'm sure you'll find it.
How much should a designer really be looking at this and maybe looking to move themselves potentially to more of a design engineer? Because there are some designers who are like, no, I still just want to focus on literally being designer. I don't need to go over there. But it's a bit different now, that conversation. So what's your take?
I kind of see it more as like a kind of a utilitarian view. Especially if you're building AI experiences, like these experiences are stochastic. And so static design tools just don't give us the right perspective on how these tools work and how they will ultimately perform in the real world. And so to me, it's less about kind of like, should they code? It's more on like, developing like the literacy or the model literacy, understanding the model requires directly interacting with the material itself. Like the metaphor that I often give around this is, so I think traditionally design has been kind of a little bit more like, pouring cement into a mold. We would design these like static containers that then data gets poured into. It was very predictable. We knew, okay, this is going to be the title, this is going to be the field for that. And like, I think that's largely changed now. Like the output or the thing that the user interacts with is now, in most cases, the model output, which could be, the text output or an image or even sort of UX itself. And in that case, to me, design becomes a little bit more like pottery now, where you actually have to be so much more hands-on with the material, shaping it, feeling how it resists, sort of learning the characteristics of it to kind of, shape it and form it into something that you might have in your mind. And so to do that, you have to be hands-on, and that requires understanding how the model works, which requires building and prototyping and interacting with it in that way. So to me, it becomes less about like, am I developing this skill because I should, but more like if I want to build great AI experiences, I need to understand how these things work. I need to develop that model literacy, and prototyping and building is kind of one of the ways, or one of the major ways to do that as a designer.
Yeah, I really like that. For it kind of simplifies it, doesn't it? All the noise in your head, if you're just saying, look, ultimately it's like you need to put together a design. You want to make it feel as real as possible and understand how it's going to actually come to fruition as possible. How's the best way to do that? Oh, yeah, maybe probably make it, code it up, so it reacts like that. And I'm very much in that camp. Like the tools I'm using on a daily basis, you really do see, even for something quite small, because obviously we know that sometimes you are designing something quite small, but it really does help when you have that interaction, even if it's a few drop downs and so on. It really does make a difference when you actually put prototype, and you'll realize like some logic changes, right? Things are more dynamic, which is really tricky to do actually with Figma typically. Obviously not Figma Make, for example. And you really do see how more dynamic it is. And you're right, it can feel very dated in static screens, maybe for big kind of flows, and it's obviously early, potentially. Like you want to show an end-to-end flow. That's one of the limitations at the moment with Figma Make, potentially, or Curse, these tools, is that obviously you want to present it to someone, you want to share it, maybe async. Sometimes it's seeing those different touch points because they know what to click when and so on. Annotating and collaboration can be a bit easier, and that's probably one of the next steps, isn't it, for the likes of say Figma Cursor, is how you can obviously collaborate on a Figma Make file, work on it, but you can't comment on pieces and stuff like that, and so that maybe that piece is what needs developing. So in a nutshell, you need to make something really real, make it feel tactile. How can you make it? Oh, there's this tool where you can code and do it, and that's the so I think that utilitarian approach is quite a nice sanity.
It should become simple though.
It makes it simple, just going, okay, then it's not that you need to learn that, it's that you want to make things feel real, you probably should do that. People are probably working on projects in their current company where maybe it's not AI focused, whatever that means. And so what would your advice be to someone who wants to now basically wants to work on something that is very much AI, and it's very clear that it's AI? Almost think of it as they want something on their portfolio where they can point to and say, that's clear, I've worked on AI first experience. What would you say to them, because they're currently working on things that are not, for example?
They really allow you to get so much further than you would be able to before as a designer. And so if you want to build an AI experience that is like there's almost every single day I see a new app or a new experience on like Threads or whatever, of like, hey, I'm like this one designer who built this app. Here's my test flight. Like
I see it every day,
right? And it's great. I enjoy it. I have like 20
lots of timers for work, focus timers.
There's like one that came out recently. I'm like, okay, I've got like 6 of these now that
you're very focused.
But like I think that like barrier of entry is so low, and if your role doesn't allow you to or doesn't sort of have the opportunity to do that, but you want to kind of demonstrate that, then just like build it yourself. Like take the time. These, there's like billions of YouTube videos explaining how to get how to jump in using Claude Code or VS Code or whatever it is to start building and just start experimenting, start playing. I think that would also be a great thing to demonstrate. Like, hey, I know how to use these tools. I've been using these tools. I understand how this stuff works. It gives you a better sense of how to, how to not just how to use AI to design or build, but also how to build AI experiences. Integrating these models in these apps are relatively easy, especially if you're guided with the model to do that. And so, yeah, to me, that's probably the easiest way to start jumping into that and share it. Get people using it, get feedback. That initiative, that self-awareness, I think is going to be what hiring managers who may be hiring for these sort of new AI first divers are looking for. People who are curious, who are experimenting, who are playing around with the tech, because that's largely, in many cases, what they are doing every single day. Seeing what they can build, seeing how they can push it forward. Everyone's building and testing and riffing off each other's ideas. Like that's what they're looking for.
On that note, in now that effectively you can easily put together a prototype and mock it up and so on. But if everyone can do it, what's the value more so of a designer in this new world?
I mean, I think it's amazing that like these roles are sort of flattening now. Like you have PMs, vibe coding stuff and engineers like experimenting with the design, especially if you have a good AI driven process where you have, good skills and good sub agent setup where, your design system and your design philosophy is baked into the model's knowledge and context. Then yeah, I mean, it makes sense that an engineer could actually take an idea from 0 to 1 and it looks great because it uses the design system and all that kind of stuff. And so when there is this increase or this sort of more creation, to me, what becomes more important for design to focus on is judgment, like understanding and figuring out like, why are we building this? What is this for? Who is this helping? Why should this exist? What problem is it solving? We kind of become that, not that voice doesn't necessarily exist, but become.
Is it PM? PM could argue they do that, like, because they wouldn't be making the prototype without thinking about that, surely. No,
probably not. But I think like these sort of vibe coded experiences, I would argue they're more like rough sketches. They're like, here's an idea. Like, here's what it might look like. And not every idea that a PM has of what they think should exist is the thing that should exist necessarily. Like, I think that's why I think the kind of like collaboration between design and PM and engineering is so important, because, you could build anything and anything could add value, but it doesn't mean that you should build everything, and doesn't mean everything will add the right value. I think there is still that level of judgment and taste that design brings to the table to kind of say, well, okay, here is a rough idea that has now been created. There's something here. Let's now introduce the human judgment to understand, like, should this be the right way we do it? Should this be the right flow? Should this be the right approach? Sometimes I think if we have like these high fidelity prototypes, it's like, well, let's just take this and build it. But like, I think there's still many rounds of revision and testing and experimentation that needs to happen to get to that right solution. So I think sort of the human judgment and taste is a responsibility that I hold. I think we all hold that responsibility, because that creation was traditionally our role, and everyone's kind of getting more involved in that now. I think we have an opportunity to stand up and play more of that PM role. I think that's okay. These roles are flattening, they're melding together. We can be a little bit more PM driven. We can be a little bit more engineering, in my opinion.
Someone has to still do the work, don't they, as well, right? And so although everyone can do it across those roles, you're still going to need someone to just allocate that time to thinking through to. The bar is just higher, isn't it, then, as well, isn't it? So yes, the PM, for example, or the eng could spend time, they could put together that design, but to really push it, then, I mean, they have to do, there's other things to be doing that are typical eng things or are typical PM things. And so the bar is just higher for design, is it? Because then now you're really trying to squeeze out, and you need someone with more dedicated time to do that. So that's why I'm actually thinking, when I think about it, you could say that is a linear line where the quality of these outputs from these design tools are like so good and one-to-one with the component and so on, with the design system. But I guess craft, it almost is more important now, almost.
100%. Yeah.
more than any, like, because that is, you are differentiating. Like, for example, we've worked on things and an eng has put eng or a PM has put something together, but that's definitely, it's not going to fly. But even if you assume that those tools will get better and the AI will help with them with coming up with a better design, it's, if a designer is going to be able to push it even further, and maybe the percentage is getting that extra 5% or whatever it is on top. So I almost feel like craft is something that people should almost be focusing on more so.
Yeah, I mean, craft is super important, and to go back to the point around like these agents getting better at like implementing design. To me, that's in a situation where the agent has the right context, where there has been time put into to externalize what good design is, and what good design means to that design team, to that company. And that's what the model is drawing from more than anything else. And that is largely, I would say, created and maintained by design. With these outputs getting better, craft today becomes wider. It's not just about how something looks, it's not just about how something feels, but it's also and also not just about the actual output itself. Like, we talk a lot about evals these days. Are like, well, was the output good quality? But that's an eval is a score in isolation. It doesn't take into consideration the context that experience was in. And again, to me, that's where design comes in. Like that role of advocating for the human experience of, well, it wasn't just me generating this image, but it was me generating this image for a purpose. This process actually helped the intent that I had, and how do we measure that? And because the generation becomes easier, becomes more commodified, the opportunity becomes in the earlier spaces where we're defining and understanding and asking why, and developing the right mental model to think about these problems, to develop the right epistemic foundation to know, like, this is why we're doing something, this is why it helps people. So when we do get to the creation side of things, like, the foundation is much stronger, and these AI tools can be at their best in helping us actually move faster.
Yeah, that really makes, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask about maybe a little bit of a segue, but obviously with you manage many people, you do mentoring and so on, and just in your experience, maybe you've not seen it directly, but maybe indirectly somehow, when a senior designer is looking to make the jump to maybe principal or director, what do you see is, like, what are some of maybe mistakes? It sounds a bit negative, but yeah, what are some of the mistakes maybe you see that's preventing them potentially making that jump?
Yeah, good question. I feel like the thing that I often hear is sort of an over reliance on that vertical skill development. You know, don't get me wrong, like, honing your craft and becoming better is a part of, in my opinion, is a part of that leveling up. But I think a part that is maybe more important is that horizontal impact you have, and how your work influences the work of others, how the level of craft you create inspires the other designers, how you develop experiences that are grounded in a system that others can use. Like, these are the characteristics, or the types of skills that I think do a better job at demonstrating what someone at a principal level or someone at a director level. Your role now is leadership role, and that leadership role, I think, requires kind of a much more kind of servant mindset of, like, how do I help others? How does the work that I do influence the work of others? And thinking more outwardly than inwardly. And so I think that's the one thing that I often kind of come back to when speaking to designers looking to level up. Like, really focus on, as you're thinking about solving problems, how does this experience that I'm creating fit within a system? How can other designers potentially use it? How do I broaden the scope so I'm taking into consideration the work that other teams are doing that might be related, and how do I bring that into a single direction? Yeah.
Yeah, that's totally how I see that as well. Um, and it's kind of one of the things is, like, which is weird, is proving or justifying that you've done that stuff, because it's a little bit more invisible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, how do you show that?
Yeah, that's the other problem. I think it's like the other kind of challenge I see is like I often see designers who are doing that who are struggling to get them a promotion because they don't really know how to communicate it, and they haven't really got like a narrative of their career, and there's strategy involved. I think in that there's a strategy involved in telling the story of your work and having that confidence in yourself. I found the best way to do that is like, to me, my manager is my biggest advocate. That's ultimately their role in the relation to me. Like, you know, and so I need to have a good, honest relationship with them as to like what my career goals are, what my plans are, and like, you know, in the meetings where levels are being discussed and promotions are being discussed, like I'm not in those conversations. Only him or her can be the one, or they can be the one that like um can really advocate for me. And so that close relationship becomes really, really important there. And so in crafting that career strategy, to me, that's a partnership between you and your manager.
It is telling that story, isn't it? It's almost, it does get into that side of things, isn't it? It's almost, you're almost like, it is kind of
It's like
maybe
personal branding or something.
personal branding and influencer type stuff, isn't it? It's in that ballpark. Particularly at a big company, isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
more,
100%. Yeah.
it's way more a skill that needs to happen because you need to make sure it's visibility and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. How do you design your day so that you're designing, doing the work, and maybe not just sitting in meetings?
Yeah.
Particularly as a senior person who it's a lot of conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm in a good number of meetings. One of the great things now is now, you can record meetings, so I can always catch up on them at 2x speed later on, and really only pick out the things that are really important. But in general, I actually enjoy the design meetings that my team run. I find that there are places where I learn a lot, and we kind of develop clarity around the problems that we're solving, like the very intentional meetings where we are advancing our thinking, and sort of developing the perspective that we have. Again, I kind of come back to this point around like, what role information workers play in this new AI age. And I think it is that sense making piece. And so those conversations are really sense making conversations to then have a strong perspective for when we go off and execute. We can do that in a very targeted, in a very intentional, in a very quick way. And so I actually enjoy the meetings. In the times when maybe I want to kind of focus, I just, the traditional block by calendar and turn off Teams, and maybe I can get a couple of hours in just building stuff.
You probably, we have these patterns and we come up with these rules for ourselves as a designer. And I wondered if, is there a rule that you kind of implemented previously for yourself that now in hindsight you might think, oh, maybe that was holding me back a little?
I think there's one thing that like I look back now and think, yeah, I don't know if I need this anymore. So I would argue that in many cases, and obviously in my context, I'm often speaking from sort of designing AI experiences, like the traditional like design thinking, double diamond kind of process. I'll be honest, I never really adhere to them super strictly, but I always felt bad about it. Like, as I'm not a proper designer, so I'm not using the double diamond. I should like that's like a try tested way to get good results. And I think those processes have served us over the years. But yeah, I think in this age now, I feel like it doesn't give us the flexibility and the kind of experimentation culture that's kind of required now to get at better solutions. Like I think there's more value in developing sessions with, domain experts in the specific, area that you're trying to solve a problem for, and iterating on what a good definition of a good experience looks like with them, both in the model output, both in the UX, and developing that as the kind of as the process of learning and testing and building. Because there again, like, you're not just having to define the UX, but you also have to define what that output should be and the quality bar of that. And a double diamond is not going to get you there. And so I think, I feel a lot less stressed maybe about like needing to follow the process, or and kind of going with that more experimentation approach that I've always kind of naturally, I guess, been connected to or been drawn to get to a solution. Yeah.
You could have imposter syndrome, couldn't you, initially?
Yeah.
Like not doing those things that are almost like the people who go to the design school and stuff like that. But then you do stuff and you just do it whatever makes sense, right? You just kind of work through it and you go, well, actually that works and worked really well.
Yeah.
Could it have worked better? Yes. But I don't think that was necessarily because of the theory potentially of it. You're very much in the same camp of you look, we've read the books and done that thing. And it's like, it is good to know. And like you said, it does serve you, but it's almost sometimes in design talk and culture and communities and stuff, like they're always over indexed. I think that's gone away a bit now, which is good. It's definitely not as much there, but there was a period where it was just like as you say, double diamond type stuff. So I think people have come around to being a bit more hacky and just it's quite simple. You need to make something and then just whatever it takes to kind of get there within
Yeah.
reason.
I mean, I think that process, what it kind of forced was thoughtfulness. Like you kind of spend time thinking about these pieces, and I think that element of it shouldn't go away. Like we should still be thoughtful about what we're doing, and that's why I really like the scientific method for experimentation, because it requires you to interrogate your work and do it in a way that's sort of dispassionate, right? Like, okay, I have this hypothesis. I think this is what's going to happen based on, intuition, based on research, based on the signals I've developed, whether that's signals within our user base or whatever that might be. Here's, what I think is going to happen. Let's build just enough to test this hypothesis, and then based on that, I can then review the results and go, did it happen? Did what I think happened? If it didn't, okay, I was wrong. Let's now revise that hypothesis and then repeat that process until we kind of start building on top of our learnings into something that I think is tangible. So yeah, I think there is still that sense of intentionality that was good in some of these processes, but I think the process itself doesn't allow us to capture the right information anymore. Yeah. I still hear this today, from designers. There is still a sense of anxiety and fear and apprehension around what all of this means for the role of design, and how do we move forward in this space. And I was chatting with a friend, actually someone on my team the other day, about how this sort of shift has some resemblance to the mobile, kind of the introduction of the mobile, part of the experience shift, where there was this new surface now that we kind of had to develop new patterns for, and it was touch first, and then there was multi-touch, and there was all these interactions that a lot of were built on a lot of like research and academic research. And I think it's kind of happening today. Like we're taking existing experiences and now we have to kind of take a step back and, think through some of the more foundational elements of that through that academic research. To me, design and the skills we've learned over the years of our career are more important now than I think ever, because if we're not careful, like these systems, they left to their own devices, they kind of average everything out, right? And without direction and guidance, they fill in the blanks. We should care about what are in those blank spaces. We should craft what are in those blank spaces. And so I think this sense of like thinking about the human experience, thinking about the person on the other side of the prompt or whatever AI experience that we're making, I think that's really, really important. Like, the same approaches that we've used in the past of understanding, like, of using our discernment and judgment to get at the value that we're trying to create. I think that's really, really important now. And same with taste, right? Taste, not just in how something looks, but also how it behaves and how it responds. Like these are if you don't define that, someone else will. And well, the average already has defined it, that's why if you look at some of the more like baseline generated experiences from all the kind of like vibe coding tools, they kind of largely look very tailwindy, purpley the same, because that's like the average. And so it's on us to inject that human judgment into what these tools are supposed to be. I feel like that's a thing that I want to encourage designers out, because yes, there's some new things we need to learn, but we've done that before. We did that with the mobile, the rise of the mobile space, and now these are just like standard patterns. And so we just got to lean in. That curiosity is key, but really kind of lean on the skills and the tools that human judgment that the model can't create on its own. Yeah.
Well, it's been amazing talking to you. I've learned lots. This has been very self-indulgent for me. So thank you. And really looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to share and bring all my crazy rectangles.
They're fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.